And her response is when. When might that be? Chad's response is in reference to a planned trip that he would take the following week, July 24th through July 26th of 2019, to be together with Lori Vallow. That's the reference to Wednesday evening to Friday. But we see Lori Vallow pushing Chad Daybell as it relates to their relationship.
So it would be Chad and Lori were going to be together physically or at the same time?
Yes, Chad Daybell traveled to be with Lori Vallow for a period of 2.5 days.
And again, during this time, was Tammy Daybell still alive?
Yes.
And moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, I believe you indicated these are a continuation as well from the previous two slides.
They are.
What was it about these messages that caught your attention?
Primarily, there was two things.
And can we go through them one by one?
Sure.
What was the first thing?
The first is again, we see Lori Vallow manipulating Chad Daybell. In the prior slide, Chad Daybell had indicated that they would have this time together Wednesday through Friday. And Lori Vallow's response to that is, then what? And she then says, back to crying and saying goodbye, back to the box, as a reference to being trapped with their inability to be together.
And at this point in time, Charles Vallow has been killed.
This is 1 week following his death.
But Tammy's still alive.
Correct.
And what was the second thing?
The second thing is line 2603, which is Chad Daybell's response to her. And he references that extreme changes are coming for him, and he welcomes those changes.
And do you recall from previous testimony references Chad also made about feeling trapped?
Judge, I'm going to object. It's leading.
Yes.
And do you recall approximately, or do you recall what those statements were, what that was in reference to?
Yes, that conversation took place at the conclusion of this trip that they're talking about. So that would have been on July 26th of 2019, where Chad Daybell references the Harry Potter stories and feeling trapped, having to live under a stairwell, and he gets to escape occasionally to have adventures with his goddess lover.
And when you look at that line 2603, there's a reference to extreme changes. Did that catch your attention?
It did.
What did you, through your investigation and experience, what did you believe that to be in reference to?
Judge, calling for speculation. Objection.
Overruled.
Well, within 3 months of this date, Tylee, JJ, and Tammy are all dead.
Moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, can you indicate the date these messages were exchanged into the record?
Yes, this is July 20th of 2019.
And who are these messages between?
Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell.
There's an individual reference named Blake. Did you learn who that was?
Blake is Melanie Boudreau's son.
Do you know his approximate age?
3 to 4 years old at the time of this message.
What about these messages caught your attention?
There were two things primarily that caught my attention in this series of communications.
What was the first one?
The first is, again, Lori Vallow is petitioning Chad Daybell to find out Blake's percentage. So repeatedly, we see Lori Vallow asking Chad Daybell to provide that information. Chad Daybell is the source of the death percentages.
What was the second thing?
The second thing is that this is a conversation about a 3 or 4-year-old child. And in line 2481, Chad Daybell writes that he decreased that child's pain tolerance to 1% and greatly increased his pain.
And do you recall in one of the previous slides in reference to Tylee Ryan, Chad talking about turning up or causing her pain?
Yes.
And moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, can you indicate the date these messages were exchanged into the record?
July 23rd of 2019.
And who were these messages between?
Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell.
What about these messages caught your attention?
Again, two things primarily caught my attention.
And what was the first thing?
The first is, if we look at the time of these messages, there's an 11-hour gap between line 2276 and 2244. In line 2276, Lori Vallow petitions Chad Daybell to check JJ. In the subsequent line, 11 hours later, she's asking Chad Daybell to check Tylee to see if Tylee has been, quote, switched. And so these messages are 5 days after the initial first message that I ever located regarding death percentages. And so this is now the second time that I could find in the review of the iCloud where Lori Vallow is asking Chad Daybell specifically to check on JJ and then to check on Tylee. So that's the first thing that stood out to me.
And Charles Vallow had been killed not long before these messages.
12 days prior.
What was the second thing that stood out to you?
The second thing that stood out to me is in line 2241, which is Chad Daybell's response to her. And he replies that, yes, Tylee has been switched. And he says, let me know when you can talk and I will explain it. So Chad Daybell is the one who will explain
Judge,
to Lori
I'm going to
Vallow.
object at this point. Speculation.
And what was the last part of that answer?
Lori Vallow is making inquiries to Chad Daybell, and Chad Daybell tells her, I will explain it.
Prior to Charles being killed, are you aware if he was deemed to have been possessed?
He was.
And ultimately he was killed.
He was.
Moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, can you read the date of these messages into the record?
Yes, July 26th of 2019.
So this is just 3 days after those last messages we looked at.
Correct.
What about these messages caught your attention?
That the pattern of Lori Vallow asking Chad Daybell to check is continuing. So on line 2119, Lori Vallow writes, need you to check JJ, and references his behavior, which was a departure from what was normal for him.
And moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, can you read into the record the date these messages were exchanged?
These messages were also, as with the previous slide, on July 26th, 2019.
What about these particular messages stood out to you?
Well, in response to the previous slide's request by Lori Vallow to Chad Daybell to check JJ, Chad Daybell replies that essentially JJ is still his true self, but he indicates whoever told Lori Vallow that JJ was calm and watching movies had been lying. So Chad Daybell answers Lori Vallow's inquiry regarding checking JJ.
And looking to that next message, are you aware who Brighton is?
Yes,
And who is that?
Brighton is another of Melanie Boudreau's children.
And the name Mel there, do you know who that was referencing?
That's Melanie Boudreau.
Was there anything about that next message that caught your attention?
This next message is is somewhat vague, but we see a reference to a big plan, which is a word that we see repeatedly in conversations between Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell referencing their plans.
And moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, can you read the date of these messages into the record?
Yes, these 4 messages were exchanged on July 29th of 2019.
Who were the messages being exchanged between?
Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow.
What about these particular messages caught your attention?
At this particular time in the investigation, Lori Vallow, Melanie Boudreau, and their children, as well as Alex Cox, had decided to take a trip to the California coast. And so these messages were sent to Lori Vallow as they were driving in the car, as Lori Vallow, Melanie Boudreau, Alex Cox, and the children were driving to California. And so Chad Daybell makes an offer to Lori Vallow to cause pain to the 2, quote, threes that she was riding with.
And looking at that, at the line 1872, did any of that catch your attention?
Of course. In line 1877, the 2 threes are referencing 2 of the children that are in the car with them. And in line 1872, Chad Daybell indicates that he would at least give them a reason to scream, indicating a supposed ability to cause physical pain to those children.
After offering to cause physical pain to the children, what were the next things he said?
He told Lori that he loved, cherished, treasured, and adored her. The wonderful memories just keep coming back. She was mesmerizing, and that Raphael, which is the name for Chad Daybell, is one lucky guy.
And moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, would you read the date of these messages into the record?
These messages were exchanged on July 30th of 2019.
And who are these messages between?
Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow.
What about these particular messages caught your attention?
There were three very critical components of these messages.
Can we start with the first one?
Yes.
And what was that?
The first one is in line 1781. This is a text initiated by Chad Daybell to Lori Vallow. And you can see that Chad said he had the inspiration to go back to my original death percentages. So this is the first time that we see the full phrase of death percentage, and it is attributable to Chad Daybell by the use of the word my. And then he indicates that these death percentages helped him track Charles, which is a reference to Charles Vallow. Ned is the name of the demonic entity that was alleged to be possessing Charles Vallow. And then he indicates that Tammy is very close. Her death percentage has fallen steadily, and concludes with, "It is encouraging!" exclamation point.
Do you also see the reference in there to Hiplos or Iplos?
Yes,
Do you know who that's in reference to?
that's the name of a demonic entity that was supposed to have been inside of Tammy Daybell.
And you said Tammy
Um,
on Hiplos.
Yes. So it says Tammy is very close. Her percentage, meaning Tammy's percentage, has fallen steadily since Hiplos left. So that entity is now out of her.
Do you recall if Hiplos was an entity that was indicated to be associated with Charles Vallow?
Judge, I'm gonna object. That's leading.
Sustained.
Do you know who else Hiplos may have been associated with?
There was another reference to that using that same demonic entity name with Charles Vallow.
What was the second thing that stood out to you?
The second thing that stood out is this reference to Chad Daybell's death percentages that helped track Charles Vallow. Charles Vallow didn't have a heart attack or pass away in his sleep.
Judge, I'm gonna object. It's narrative.
Overruled.
He was shot and killed. And so these death percentages by Chad Daybell are not simply a reference to natural deaths.
And what was the third thing?
Well, the third thing is in lines 1779 and 1778. Lori's response to Chad is to inquire, what is the percentage now? Meaning, what is Tammy Daybell's death percentage? And then she follows that up with yet another inquiry. This would be now the third inquiry about JJ's death percentage. Chad Daybell responds, Tammy is at 3, JJ is at 2.
And based on your review and your investigation, in relation to death percentages, what was the indication the lower the number got?
Well, it's not consistent. So you have references where the lower the number, the closer to death they are. And then you have references where the higher the number, the closer they are. So in the previous communication, you saw Chad Daybell indicate that JJ was at 99.99, and he instructed JJ to follow Amy into the light. In this occasion, we flipped and they're at the opposite end of the spectrum, saying that Tammy is at 3 and now JJ is at 2 versus the prior message. So there's a lack of consistency, but the higher the number in one case, the lower the number in another.
And moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, can you indicate the date these messages were sent into the record?
Yes, July 30th, 2019. These are a continuation from the previous slide.
And what about these messages stood out to you?
Well, first, Lori Vallow's response back to Chad Daybell after receiving his answer that I believe it was Tammy was at a 3 and JJ was at a 2. She replies 2 and 3%, not 0. So we see Lori Vallow pushing 0, meaning the time has come for those individuals to die.
Judge, objection, calls for speculation. I'm going to move to strike, Judge.
Well, the objection's not timely. I'll overrule it at this point, but Ms. Blake, I am concerned if the witness is making his own interpretations of these messages, not based on the investigation. So if you could direct the examination that way, that'll help with the objections.
And in coming to that conclusion, was that based on your experience and your review of the information?
Yes.
What else stood out about this particular message?
Line 1776, where Chad Daybell says, "I will explain when we talk," indicating he is the source of what's happening.
Was that consistent with your review of these messages?
Yes, we see that exact phrase multiple times. "I will explain."
Anything else about this particular series that stood out to you?
Well, lastly, again, we see how Lori Vallow is attempting to manipulate Chad Daybell. She concludes this conversation with, "Okay, still feeling hot for you."
And moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, can you indicate the date these were being sent into the record?
These two text messages were also on July 30th of 2019.
And who were these messages between?
Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow.
What about these particular messages caught your attention?
Two things.
What was the first one?
The first is a continuation to further explain Chad Daybell's death percentages. In the second sentence, he references this chart that checks what percentage mortals are still in their body, and then indicates that it worked for his friend's wife who died. And so we see just a further explanation of death percentages, and that this is talking about physical, real death, not spiritual death or some other kind of death.
Was that chart that was referenced, was a copy of it ever located?
No, we could never find the actual chart. I I can't account for where it might be.
And what was the second thing that stood out to you?
Well, there are two more. The first is that he references Tammy Daybell, his wife, that she said she felt lightheaded as if her body and spirit weren't connected.
And then what was the third thing?
The third thing is in line 1773, where Chad Daybell indicates he would update the list and figure out Brandon, Adam, and others. The reference to Brandon is Brandon Boudreau, and on October 2nd of 2019.
Judge, I'm going to object at this point. This is definitely becoming a narrative.
Sustained.
Who was Brandon referencing?
Brandon Boudreau.
Do you know of something that happened in relation to Brandon Boudreau?
Yes,
What was that?
on October 2nd, 2019, an attempt was made on his life.
Are you aware of an attempt that was made on Tammy Daybell's life?
Judge, I'm going to object. Calls for speculation.
Overruled.
I am.
And when was that?
October 9th, 2019.
Moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, can you indicate the date these images were sent?
These were both sent on August 7th of 2019.
Were you able to, looking at that first image there, who is that?
That is Chad Daybell.
Can you tell from the photo what type of building he may be in?
Yes, it's the lobby of an LDS, an old LDS church.
And who sent that photo?
So the photo of Chad Daybell was sent by Alex Cox to Lori Vallow with the caption, "Look at the bubbies."
Do you know what Bubbies was a reference to?
That was a word.
Judge, objections. Calling for speculation. No foundation.
I'll sustain that without additional foundation.
Through your investigation and review of messages, were you able to determine what Bubbies was in reference to?
Yes,
And what was that?
it's just simply a pet name that Lori had for Chad Daybell and Alex Cox or other men in her life.
And could you see the time that that message was sent?
10:48 a.m.
And turning to the next image, who are we seeing in that photo?
That's a photograph of Alex Cox.
Does that appear to be in the same location?
Yes,
And what time was that message sent?
1 minute prior on 10:47 a.m.
Who sent that message?
Chad Daybell,
And who did he send it to?
Lori Vallow.
What was the caption that Chad included?
Two exalted beings.
Was Tammy Daybell still alive on August 7th of 2019?
Yes,
Moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. Would you please indicate the date these messages were sent into the record?
These messages were exchanged on August 7th of 2019.
Who were the messages exchanged between?
Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell.
And these messages were sent on the same day as those two images?
Correct.
What about these messages stood out to you?
The thing that stood out the most in this text series is in line 1391 in the text from Lori Vallow to Chad Daybell, where she indicates, "We are both so tired of taking care of demons. We are weary. Please ask the Lord to take them!" Exclamation point.
And Lori was sending that request to Chad?
Correct.
And moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, can you indicate the date these messages were sent into the record?
These messages were exchanged on August 10th of 2019.
And is it fair to say that some of the next slides are going to correspond with the same date?
Yes, it's this slide and the next 5 slides are all a continuous exchange of messages between Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell.
What about this first slide with these messages caught your attention in relation to the investigation?
What first caught my attention is we see now, I believe, the 4th time that Lori Vallow is asking Chad Daybell to check on JJ. And Chad Daybell responds once again that JJ is still JJ.
And at this point, Charles has been dead for almost a month.
Correct.
Through the investigation and your review of the information in this case, did Lori have help with JJ prior to Charles passing?
Absolutely.
And who was helping her with him?
Charles Vallow spent a considerable amount of time and effort in caring for
Judge, I'm going to
JJ.
object at this point. Move to strike. There hasn't been sufficient foundation.
Sustain.
Through the review of iCloud, did you review videos?
Yes,
Did you review other content?
yes,
In that content, were there references to Charles taking care of JJ?
many.
And at the time these percentages are being pursued, Charles is no longer able to assist with JJ.
Correct.
Moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, you'd indicated this is a continuation of the previous slide.
Yes.
And what about these particular messages caught your attention?
Well, primarily line 1170. In the last line of the previous slide, Lori Vallow asks Chad Daybell if JJ is at 0 yet. And we see Chad Daybell's response to that question. Yes, he's at 0. He was probably partly through the veil, talking to people, both light and dark.
And on the previous slide, in this one, we again see a reference to Blake. Again, who was Blake?
Blake is Melanie Boudreau's child.
Moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, is this again a continuation of the previous 2 slides?
It is.
Who are these messages being exchanged between?
Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell.
What about these particular messages stood out to you in relation to the investigation?
This particular conversation is some of the most critical evidence that I located within the iCloud. It represents the clearest and most specific reference.
Judge, I'm going to object again. This is speculation.
Overruled.
It represents the clearest and most specific reference to a plan regarding Tylee and JJ. That plan is spearheaded by Chad Daybell.
Judge, I'm going to object at this point. That's a narrative
Also,
and it's argumentative,
it's sustained.
and I'm going to move to strike.
That last part of the comment is stricken.
When you indicate that there's the reference to the plan, who is asking if there's a plan?
Lori Vallow is asking Chad Daybell if there is a, quote, perfectly orchestrated plan to take the children.
What is Chad's response?
Chad's response is that there is a plan being orchestrated for the children.
Where were Tylee and JJ's remains ultimately located?
On Chad Daybell's property.
And moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, is this also a continuation from some of the previous slides?
Yes, it is.
Who are these messages being sent between?
Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell.
What about these particular messages stood out to you in relation to the investigation?
Well, first off is line 1159. In the previous slide, there was a question about a plan and a verification of a plan. Then Lori Vallow asks Chad Daybell, what should I be doing? And in the subsequent line, 1158, Chad Daybell provides an answer to her, which concludes with being unencumbered and fully free.
There's also a reference in that to telestial issues. Do you know through the investigation what telestial would be referencing?
I do.
What is that?
Issues pertaining to this earthly life.
And in some of the previous messages, Lori was inquiring about the death percentages of Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow.
That's correct.
What else stood out in relation to these messages?
Line 1155 is very critical. Chad Daybell texts Lori Vallow and indicates that JJ is, quote, getting close. When I was sitting across from him eating bacon, I sensed he was barely attached to his body.
Do you know when the last time JJ Vallow was seen?
I do.
When was that?
September 22nd, 2019.
And moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, again, is this a continuation of some of those previous slides?
Yes, it is. And I believe there's one more that is part of this conversation.
I'm going to move to that slide and pause to allow the jurors to read that one as well. And going back to that previous slide, what about this one caught your attention?
Well, this is just the continuation of the conversation. I think the more important content is on the following slide.
And what about these particular messages stood out to you?
Primarily lines 1117 and 1113. In 1117, Lori Vallow, as we've seen previously, says to Chad Daybell, I can't wait, literally can't wait. I have no patience. I want you now, with 2 fire emojis. And then we see Chad Daybell's response to that, which point.
Based on your investigation, your review of the content of the iCloud, what did you determine the finish line to be?
The finish line was for Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow to live this fantasy life together that they had constructed and referenced in this plan that they're talking about.
Did that include being unencumbered?
Judge, I'm going to object. Calls for speculation.
Overruled.
Unencumbered from her husband and her children and from his wife. Yes.
Your Honor, looking at the time, I don't know if you'd like to do the mid-morning break.
I think this would be a good time for that. Thank you, Ms. Blake. We will take our mid-morning recess. We'll come back on just 10:30 or perhaps shortly before 10:30. Thank you.
All rise, please. All rise. District Court's again in session.
Thank you. Please be seated. All right, Mr. Bailiff, we'd like the jurors brought in, please.
Sure. All right, please. Here's our President Counter for you, Honor.
Thank you. Please be seated. All right, we're back on the record on CR 22-21-1623, State of Idaho versus Chad Daybell. Continuing with direct examination. Agent Hart, if you'd like to continue, Ms. Blake, you may.
Thank you, Your Honor. And may I go back to publishing?
Yes, you may.
And Agent Hart, we'd left off with this slide. Do you recall that?
Yes,
And we'd left off talking about the finish line.
correct.
Was this the last slide that was part of this particular series of texts?
Yes, it was.
And moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, can you indicate the date that these messages were being exchanged?
Yes, this text exchange is from September 3rd of 2019
Who are the messages being exchanged between?
between Alex Cox and his sister Lori Vallow.
Do you know where Lori Vallow was living at this time?
Yes, both Alex Cox and Lori Vallow moved to Rexburg, Idaho from Arizona on September 1st of 2019.
Was there anything else about these messages that stood out to you?
Line 264 from Alex Cox to Lori Vallow, where he indicates the network password is too many kids. And her response is funny, exclamation point, exclamation point.
When was the last known sighting of Tylee Ryan?
Last known sighting of Tylee Ryan was September 8th of 2019.
And when was the last known sighting of JJ Vallow?
September 22nd of 2019.
And moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, is this a continuation from the previous slide?
Yes, it is.
Who are these messages between?
Again, between Alex Cox and Lori Vallow.
What about these particular messages caught your attention in relation to the investigation?
In relation to the investigation, these few messages provide a little bit of insight as to Alex Cox's role within this small circle of people, Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell.
And in that line, do you know what the Z's was referring to based on your investigation?
I do.
What would Z's be in reference to?
Z's is an abbreviation for zombies.
And then when we look to that line 261 in particular, was there something about that that stood out to you?
Yes, Lori Vallow indicates that they're trying to get to the bottom of what we need to do to eliminate them completely. And then she indicates to Alex Cox that he would be told also. And so to me, that sheds light on
Judge, I'm going to object. It's becoming a narrative and it's calling for speculation.
Overruled.
it sheds light on Alex's knowledge, how much knowledge he has, and that he too would be told what to do or what his role would be.
In your review of these messages, was Alex included in the text regarding death percentages?
He was not.
And this message indicates Alex would be told.
Correct.
And what was Alex's response?
Excellent.
And again, those messages were exchanged on September 3rd of 2019.
Yes.
What are we seeing in this slide?
This slide contains a very short, it's just a few seconds, video that I located within the iCloud. As part of our investigation, we went to great pains to try to determine when Tylee was killed and when was the last known sighting that we could verify. And that last known sighting is on September 8th, 2019. This is a video of a trip that was taken with Lori Vallow, Alex Cox, JJ, and Tylee to Yellowstone National Park. It's the last known living proof for Tylee.
And this is 5 days after the messages about eliminating zombies completely,
Yes,
and 5 days after the messages about Alex being told what to do.
yes.
And who else was in that video?
Tylee is hugging her younger brother, JJ, and Alex Cox is standing off to the side.
Can you tell us what we're seeing in this slide?
Yes, in a similar vein, we searched for what would be the last known sighting or living proof of JJ. And this is what I located on the iCloud. It's from September 22nd of 2019 at 10:46 a.m. in the morning. Subsequent to this video, there are no other photos or videos existing in the iCloud of JJ.
And again, where were JJ and Tylee's remains found?
Chad Daybell's property.
Moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, can you indicate the date these messages were exchanged?
These are from September 24th of 2019.
Who are these messages between?
These are messages between Sydney Woodbury and Lori Vallow.
And in relation to this date, was it significant?
Yes,
And why was that?
the date is 2 days after our last known living proof for JJ.
What else about these messages stood out to you in relation to your investigation?
These are the first lies we can find documented by Lori Vallow regarding JJ and his whereabouts.
And moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, there's 3 messages here that all contain a different date. Is that correct?
It is.
At the time these messages were exchanged, was Charles Vallow alive?
No,
Was Tylee Ryan believed to be alive?
no,
JJ Vallow believed to be alive?
nope,
Was Tammy Daybell alive?
yes.
Looking at the first message, can you indicate the date that was sent?
First message was sent on October 3rd of 2019.
Who was it being sent from and who was it going to?
This was a message from Chad Daybell to Lori Vallow.
Was there something about that message that stood out to you?
Yes, Chad Daybell indicated that he was so excited to go on a date with Lori Vallow.
And the next one, can you indicate the date?
It's the following day, October 4th, 2019.
And who is that message from?
That's a message from Lori Vallow to her brother, Alex Cox.
And what about that, if anything, caught your attention?
Well, at this point, both Alex Cox and Lori Vallow had moved to Rexburg, Idaho, were living in Rexburg, Idaho. And the investigation indicates that Tammy or Tylee and JJ were both deceased at this point. Lori Vallow says to Alex Cox, "We are supposed to go on a quote real date tonight, but are discussing it. And then she indicates perhaps an evening at home would be better, so we are not out and about.
And again, at this time, Tammy Daybell is still alive.
She is.
Where was Lori Vallow living at this time?
She was living in Rexburg, Idaho, which is a very short distance from Sugar City, where the Daybell residence was located.
And then looking at that last message, can you indicate the date?
October 5th, 2019.
Who was that message being sent from and who was it going to?
So this is a message from Chad Daybell to Lori Vallow. And then there will be two more slides that are a continuation of Chad Daybell reaching out to Lori Vallow approximately 12 hours after the prior text, indicating that an evening home may be better rather than a real date.
And in that last message, can you read that last message into the record?
Hello, sweet angel. Big news about Tammy. Please let me know if you are awake and can talk. I love you, exclamation point, and then heart and lip emojis.
There's an indication in there from Chad to Lori that there's big news about Tammy. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, can you indicate the date these messages were exchanged?
Yes, the date is October 5th, 2019. And the times are within minutes of one another, as well as within minutes of the prior text where Chad Daybell indicated he had big news about Tammy.
And looking at these messages, were there things that caught your attention?
Yes, there's two text messages on this slide and then two more text messages. All four of these text messages are from Chad Daybell to Lori Vallow. I found no response from Lori Vallow to these messages. But in these messages, Chad Daybell is providing an explanation, a narrative indicating that Tammy has been switched and that there is a demonic entity that is now in Tammy Daybell's body that she wants removed. And that word removed, I think, is critical.
And do you see in here a reference to the name of the demonic entity?
Yes, the name that Chad Daybell assigns to this demonic entity is Viola.
Judge, I'm going to object, move to strike. There's no testimony regarding who assigned what.
Overruled.
We talked about the word removal based on your review of the iCloud account, your review of other things involved in this investigation. What was significant about removal?
Removal indicates the physical death of the person who has the demonic entity.
And moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, I believe you indicated this is a continuation from the previous slide.
It is. These are all, I believe the very first text message was 4:36 a.m. And so the final and fifth text message in this string, all from Chad Daybell to Lori Vallow, is at 4:54 a.m.
And again, what day?
on October 5th of 2019.
What about these particular messages caught your attention in relation to the investigation?
In relation to the investigation, line 769 is a crucial piece of evidence from the iCloud that is a very specific reference to the alleged crimes involving Tammy Daybell.
Judge, object. Mischaracterization, speculation, argumentative.
I'm going to sustain that as argumentative.
We had just talked about the meaning of the word removal in the investigation. Do you see reference to removal in this line?
I do. Chad Daybell writes, not fully sure of the timing for removal, but once her actions verify the differences, I don't want to wait.
What happened on October 9th of 2019?
October 9th,
Answer, Judge.
What was that?
Objection. I asked and answered.
Overruled.
on October 9th, 2019 was the first attempt on Tammy Daybell's life.
Moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, can you indicate the date these messages were being exchanged?
These are messages exchanged on October 19th, 2019.
What was significant about October 19th of 2019 in your investigation?
That is the date of Tammy Daybell's death.
Who were these text messages being exchanged between?
This is between Lori Vallow and an individual who wasn't identified by name within the iCloud. So I can't tell you who this is that's telling her this information.
What was significant about these messages? Or let me withdraw that. What caught your attention in relation to these messages?
Simply that someone knew that Tammy Daybell had died and then provided that information to Lori Vallow, who was in Hawaii at the time.
Do you know where Chad Daybell was at the time?
In his residence in Sugar City, Idaho.
Do you know where Alex Cox was?
Alex Cox was in Rexburg, Idaho.
And moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, can you indicate the date these messages were exchanged?
Again, on October 19th, 2019.
And who were these messages being exchanged between?
These are between Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell.
What in relation to these messages stood out to you in relation to the investigation?
Primarily the timing of the messages in conjunction with Tammy Daybell's death. And then this is the first in a series of messages over the next 24 hours or so between Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow subsequent to Tammy Daybell's death.
And again, Tammy Daybell was pronounced dead on October 19th of 2019.
Yes, the call, the 911 call was approximately 6 a.m. on October 19th, 2019.
So the same day these messages are exchanged.
Correct.
And move to the next slide and pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, can you indicate the date these messages were exchanged?
These messages are on October 20th, 2019.
And who were these messages between?
Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow.
And this is the day after Tammy's been pronounced dead?
Well, the first two messages, as you can see, are just past midnight, so they're approximately 18 hours after Tammy Daybell's death. And then the last two messages are approximately 25 and a half hours after that 911 call regarding Tammy Daybell's death.
What else about these messages stood out to you in relation to the investigation?
Well, line 527 on that date is a text from Chad to Lori Vallow, where he indicates, "I love talking with you. It's baby night, so come get me later."
Do you know where Lori Vallow would have been at that time?
She's in Hawaii.
In the messages that you reviewed shortly after Tammy's death, any expression of grief by Chad Daybell regarding his wife's death?
None.
Any expression of grief by Lori Vallow?
None.
And if you recall, when you testified previously, you'd reviewed messages around the time of Charles' death, is that correct?
Yes.
Any expression of grief by Lori in those?
None.
Any expression of grief by Chad in those?
No.
Moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, can you indicate the date these messages were exchanged?
October 20th of 2019 in the early morning hours.
And who are they being exchanged between?
Again, it's a continuation between Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell.
Were there things about these particular messages that stood out to you in relation to the investigation?
We're now getting into the logistics of Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow being together subsequent to Tammy Daybell's death. Lori Vallow actually invites Chad to jump on a plane and come to Kauai. And Chad Daybell responds that she should come back to the mainland so that they can spend the night together on Thursday, and then indicates wanting to look for a condo so that they could return to Kauai at the first of the month, meaning November.
And do you recall from your previous testimony reviewing some messages regarding a plan to be in Kauai?
I do.
And who was that plan between?
Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow.
Do you know if Chad and Lori were ultimately married?
They were
Where did they get married?
on the island of Kauai.
Do you know where Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow moved to?
The island of Kauai.
And this conversation took place about 25 hours after Tammy Daybell had been pronounced dead.
About 26 hours after the 911 call by Chad Daybell to indicate to authorities that his wife was dead.
Moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, would you indicate the date that these messages were exchanged?
October 20th of 2019.
And are these a continuation from some of the previous slides we've reviewed?
Yes, they are.
And who were these messages between?
Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow.
In relation to your investigation, what stood out to you with these messages?
Again, it's a continuation of the fulfillment of their plans to be together. The first line, 5118, Chad Daybell indicates a workout plan for Lily, who is Lori Vallow, that he wants to tighten his abs, get a full body tan, grow his hair out, and that it could be really good for both him and Lori Vallow.
And in that last one, 516, do you know who Raphael and Lily is referring to?
Those are, again, alternate names for Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow.
And is there an indication there about how much they will be together?
100%.
Moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. Agent Hart, can you please indicate the date these messages were exchanged?
Yes, this is the conclusion of this text string, and the date is October 20th, 2019.
And who are the messages between?
Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell.
Was there anything that stood out to you in relation to the investigation in these messages?
Yes. In line 515, you have Lori Vallow indicating how consuming her love is for Chad Daybell. And then of note, line 514, Chad Daybell responds, "I know exactly how you feel. I'm feeling sad, but it isn't for the reason everyone thinks!" Exclamation point.
Through the investigation, did you learn what the connection between Alex Cox and Chad Daybell was?
Yes.
What was that?
Alex Cox was an adherent of Chad
Judge,
Daybell.
objection, argumentative.
Sustain.
Did Chad beat Alex through Lori?
Yes.
Based on your investigation, review of messages, and other things, would Alex do as Chad asked?
Judge, objection, argumentative.
Overruled.
Yes.
Did Tammy Daybell know Alex Cox based on what you learned in the investigation?
No, she did not.
Was the only connection between Tammy and Alex Chad?
Correct.
Moving to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, can you indicate the date these messages were exchanged?
Yes, October 23rd of 2019.
And who were the messages being exchanged between?
Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell.
And do you recall in a previous slide talking about a message where Alex was going to be told information also?
Yes.
What about these messages stood out to you in relation to the investigation?
In relation to the investigation, primarily lines 482 and 481 stood out to me. In line 482, Lori Vallow indicates she's had a bad dream about Al, and primarily line 481, Lori indicates that Alex Cox would be the one they use to get us both. All this alone time is not good for him. So something that Alex Cox knows is a risk to Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell.
Based on your investigation, review of the iCloud, and other information, who was the they being referred to?
Objection, speculation.
Overruled.
I believe that is a direct reference to law enforcement.
What is Chad's response in line 479?
Chad Daybell indicates, "I will try to reach out to him later today."
So Chad was going to be the one to reach out to Al.
Correct.
And Lori was requesting Chad's help with talking to Al.
Correct.
And again, through your review of the messages, who was seeking information?
Primarily Lori Vallow,
And who was providing the answers?
primarily Chad Daybell.
I have no further questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blake. All right, Mr. Pryor, cross-examination.
Thank you, Judge. Agent Hart, there was a discussion about when you're investigating missing children, who the potential folks that you would look to if you were starting your investigation. Do you recall that discussion?
Yes,
And wouldn't it be fair to say that an obvious person to look for or look at when you're investigating missing children would be a new husband?
in addition to others, yes. We would look at the parent or the husband. I guess my point was you can't put blinders on. You can't exclusively hone in on one person at the onset of an investigation.
Right. And it would be inappropriate to do that. I mean, when you're looking and conducting an investigation, wouldn't it be fair to say that any and all evidence that you obtain, you should look at all leads of evidence and not target your investigation in one channel? Would that be fair?
Yes, that's what we did.
Okay. And that's what as far as the FBI, that's what you did, right?
I participated in dozens of meetings with the Rexburg Police Department and the Fremont County Sheriff's Office. It's my belief that's what all of us did.
Okay. So again, just to reiterate, it's your contention that you didn't fail to investigate or look into evidence that might lead you in a different direction. Would that be fair?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, as part of your FBI training, you talked about that you were involved in the task of looking for identifying missing children, correct?
Yes.
And as part of that FBI training, is it your experience or the FBI's experience that they ever utilized the use of a medium to try to locate or talk to children who have passed on?
It's extremely common for people who claim to have those abilities to come forward, but no, the FBI does not employ mediums in its investigations.
And I didn't say employ, I said utilize, but do you know the name Allison Dubois?
I believe I'm familiar with that name, yes.
And Ms. Dubois is a medium who claims to have the ability to talk to children and to help.
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel's testifying. Move to strike.
Abstain.
What is your knowledge of Allison Dubois?
It's my belief that she holds herself out to be a spiritual medium.
And that spiritual medium is being able to talk to children who have passed on?
I couldn't say specifically what abilities she claims to have.
Okay, and I don't want to say employ, but has the FBI or any agency you've been involved in ever employed Allison Dubois or any other medium in helping gain information?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
Overruled.
Gain information about the whereabouts or the circumstances surrounding the death of a children or anyone in particular.
Well, Mr. Pryor, when I said employ, I think I mean the same thing you do as utilize,
Okay.
not pay money to. I am I've never spoken with Alison Dubois. I've never requested her services. To my knowledge, nobody in this investigation requested her services. Many times these people come forward offering their services and offering what they claim to have seen.
So you are familiar that there are people out there who, as a professional occupation, claim to be able to engage in these spiritual exercises, for lack of a better word, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Sustained.
Okay. So would it be fair to say that if Chad Daybell placed himself out as someone who claims to be able to have these spiritual gifts, that in itself is not unusual? Would you agree with that?
I don't believe it's common.
Okay. Your concern is that the number of text messages in reference to Tammy and the children, that's where you say that's where we potentially have a problem, correct?
Given what happened to Tammy and Tylee and JJ, yes.
Okay. Okay. Now, I noticed during your dissertation with all of your exhibits, on around 8/11, August 11th of 2019, it appears that there are some captions that were left out regarding a breakup between Lori and Chad Daybell. Do you recall that?
I believe those were included in the first testimony that I provided a number of weeks ago.
Okay, and those were not included in today's testimony, is that right?
They were not part.
For more than a minute. And Judge, if we could start publishing.
All right, we will.
Now, officer, I apologize. Agent, line 856 talks about from Chad Daybell to Lori Vallow, the next 2 days will be torture. Do you see that?
I do.
Then there's a comment from Chad, makes a comment, and could you read that thankfully?
Thankfully, I will be alone most of Wednesday and beyond.
Okay, and then we go to line 854. Are these there's no text messages that are in between each of these. Is that correct?
So in the iCloud, there can be. So in between 856 and 854, Lori Vallow could have gotten a text from a friend about lunch. And so they're just arranged and given a line number based on the date and time. So that's how this works.
Okay, so the time on the first one, 856, is at 9:56. The 854 would be the next correspondence from Lori Vallow to Chad, correct?
Yes.
And if you could read that entire text message starting with the word is.
Is that what he wants? For me to sit around waiting for you endlessly and you miserably wasting time? It just doesn't feel right! Exclamation point.
Okay. Now, you talked about the manipulation that was engaged in these, many of these, and you said use the word many, from Lori Vallow to Chad Daybell. Is this an example in your mind of Lori Vallow again manipulating Chad Daybell?
Absolutely. It was a two-way street. Lori Vallow would manipulate Chad Daybell and vice versa.
Okay, and Chad's manipulation would be talking about the religious knowledge that he claims to have in this vast wisdom. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So on two levels, we have manipulation, at least according to you. We would have manipulation because someone's claiming to have some religious knowledge and espouses that by trying to impress Lori Vallow with that vast religious knowledge, correct?
I think it's more than knowledge. I think it's direction.
Okay. And then in Lori's case, this is manipulation and trying to get Chad to do what she wants him to do, correct?
Yes, I would agree.
Okay. Okay. And Judge, could we unpublish at this point to like move to the next slide?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, and then if we could publish again.
Go ahead.
And then again on 811, it talks about Chad to Lori Vallow. I'm frustrated. I'm sorry, honey. And then let's go to line 843, which appears to have occurred at about the same time the first text. And if you could read line 843, starting with you.
You can't just keep tearing my heart out. I really can't take it anymore. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay. And then let's go down to line 841 and start with reading that one for me.
What about the past 2 days? I didn't even get to talk to you on your birthday. I'm clearly not a priority. I just don't want to be so sad all the time and do heartbroken.
And again, in your professional experience with dealing with this case, is that another instance where Lori Vallow may be trying to manipulate Chad Daybell?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. And Judge, if we could unpublish again.
Yes.
And let's publish again, Judge. Okay. And then if you would read line 840.
If you really loved me, you wouldn't want that either.
Okay. And then Chad Daybell responds. That was from Lori Vallow to Chad, correct?
Yes.
And then 2 minutes later, Chad discusses that he couldn't have talked, the girls were there. And he expresses his true love for Lori Vallow, correct?
Yes,
And then if you would be so kind, 2 minutes later at 10:15, Lori Vallow texts Chad Daybell. And if you could just read the entire line starting with you.
you should give all of you love and your attention to your wife and family. I'm just a distraction. Go have fun with your family. I really do want you to. I just can't be in the way anymore. If things change, then we can talk. But we have nothing until things change anyway.
And once again, I don't want to keep reiterating this, but this is another example of Lori Vallow attempting to manipulate Chad Daybell. Would you agree?
I would.
Okay. And it seems a little bit final. And it seems as if that the suggestion here is on 8/11 of 2019 that there's a breakup between Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. Do you agree with that?
I do.
Judge, we can unpublish this.
All right. All right, that concludes cross.
should continue to drive and get off the freeway. The speeds here are so high, so much higher. The danger is just so much. Oh, absolutely not. Like, yeah. Absolutely. Like, if you hit a flat tire and you're in a position where you're blocking a lane, we always encourage you. Same thing with the crash. We tell them, like, yeah, unless your vehicle is completely disabled, and even then, if that's the case, staying in the car and getting seatbelt is potentially far better than getting out of the vehicle. So that's what we see a lot of our vehicles even after the crash. They'll get out and start walking around and checking in. We have identified the, we are working on notification of family right now, so. Yeah, so once we have.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I have a reporter coming, you have a photographer coming, but I don't think anyone else will. So we'll grab sound once that happens.
Okay.
I think I'll do a live hit at 12:30 just to get that information and then we'll do something with the news later.
Okay. Let me know what you need from me. Just come find me
Okay.
and I'll be up here. I'll
Yeah,
throw my
is it
best
okay if
one.
we walk up there for you or do you want to take it scary?
Just send somebody up to get me. It's fine. At least when we do with body. So watch the discovery, get photos. So yeah, so that's our goal. I want to get inadvertently, accidentally grab.
Yeah.
I'll keep wandering back and forth.
Okay.
Just let me know when you go. 10 minutes? Okay. I'll make sure.
That works.
Okay, appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah.
And it was Lieutenant, right?
Yeah, Lieutenant.
Lieutenant Fellows, thank you.
Sorry to get your hopes up. I thought Roden was coming out here, but I guess it's you.
I was like, hey man, that's great. He's like, I got a training. at this one."
Oh
I
no!
called in too.
No worries, it's all good. I'll take care of it. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's no worries.
Okay.
Thanks.
Do you get what I'm saying now?
No.
How did you get down here?
I went around over there.
Okay, so what you got off right here, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You finished right there, and then that one. No.
I thought it was that one.
What's that?
That flashing light.
That one.
No, I know. I couldn't see anything from there. But then I could see those ones.
Did you see this?
No.
How did you not see
I wasn't able to see.
that? Yeah, there you
I thought it
go.
was that one over there. The map was showing on that side.
They might want you to.
What's the plan?
They might want you to do a live video.
Okay. Yeah. Oh. I what if you tell me? What am I saying?
So, one person deceased, they got a flat tire, they moved to the left-hand lane, they got out behind the vehicle to check the tire, that's when another vehicle hit them. Off-duty officer saw it, called it in,
'Kay.
went to help, one person deceased.
Was it the suspect?
Yes, they're
Okay.
cooperating with police.
Okay. What kind of car was it? Yeah. Which one are we?
No cops. No extra cops.
No. Which unity are we?
What?
What unity are we?
4.
4, thank you. Mike? Oh, I'm holding it. Never mind.
Give me a test.
Mic check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
You see the car? You see the car?
Yes. Okay. So, when did this happen?
Say about an hour ago.
Okay. Hi there. Rex, I can hear you. Yes.
Good after.
Gotta give me cues I can't hear.
2.5. Rex, is there any toss to me, or is it just straight, do I start talking?
Okay.
Okay, sweet, thank you.
Step out to your left, okay?
Okay. Robin, good afternoon. Just about an hour ago, a fatal crash here on SR 201 eastbound? Eastbound SR 201. Now, you can see that car behind. Oh, can they still see the car?
What?
Can they still see the car with people blocking it? Or?
Yeah, except for
Okay, okay. Okay, so a little over an hour ago, a fatal crash here on SR 201 eastbound. Now that car behind me, someone had a flat tire. They pulled over to the, huh? I think like 2 minutes. Okay, so a little over an hour ago, there was a deadly crash here on 90 here on SR. Okay, then we won't. Okay, on SR 201. Now we have confirmed that one person has passed away. They were driving on this freeway. They pulled over to the left lane when they thought they had a flat tire, came behind the car, and that's when another car hit that person, and he died on scene? And he or she, do we know anything? Okay, and that person passed away here at the scene. The driver is cooperating with authorities. Now, the on-ramp to SR 201 on Bangalore Highway, 1 minute. The on-ramp onto SR 201 eastbound is closed on Bangalore, and the freeway is backed up as well. Do we know how long? Okay. And we don't know how much longer troopers will be here investigating. Oh.
You can step out of the way so I can see the other.
Okay.
Are we too far away? Too close?
Stand by. Stand by, 30 out. Robin, we're here on SR 201 eastbound, and we have confirmed that one person has passed away. Now, that person was driving here eastbound. They pulled over to the left lane when they thought they had a flat tire, came up behind the car, and that's when another car hit them, and they have passed away on scene from those injuries. Now, that driver has stayed on scene, is cooperating with authorities. The on-ramp from Bangalore Highway onto SR 201 eastbound is closed right now. The freeway on SR 201, cars are backed up. You can kind of see them lining up on the freeway. We don't have an estimated time for when this scene will clear, but we will stay close to this story and keep you updated as we get those details. Live in West Valley City, I am Maitili Gubbi, Fox 13 News, Utah. Is that accurate?
Never step out of the way.
Yeah, because you can't see them.
Yes, you can. That's what I said.
I thought you
out
said
of
you
the
can't
way.
see them.
Yeah, I said step out of the way, and you were like, okay, and you stepped out of the way. And
Yeah, and then you said she was see them.
Look.
Sorry. Sorry, I didn't realize. I thought you said you couldn't see them. And then I was like, okay. We should have said move. I'm sorry. Are you mad at me?
I'm fine. Just Yeah, that's what I was just gonna tell you, and to make sure you saw it.
Yeah, we were live, and I saw it. I'm like,
Test.
so you only need the one sound bite, right?
Yep.
One video feed, and we'll be good. You want to do it, go crazy.
Is your reporter still here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, that for not putting the safety vest on.
Lovely.
All right, we good?
Go ahead and stand it.
How are you? There we go.
Is that good, or you want me to flip it?
Appreciate it. Thank you.
So hard to hear.
Sorry about that.
All right, is that audio? Okay. All right. I don't know where you want me to look. Just look right in the middle? Okay, perfect. Okay.
Okay, Lieutenant, stand and spell your name for us.
My name is Ben Fallows. Last name Fallows.
Okay, just describe for us what happened.
So we had a vehicle, multiple vehicles, obviously. But the initial vehicle was traveling eastbound on SR201. The vehicle had a flat tire. The vehicle pulled off. In this area, there's no shoulder, so they actually partially blocked the far left lane. From what we can gather, the driver got out of the vehicle and was to the rear of the vehicle. We're assuming probably trying to access the tire or different tools to change the vehicle's tire. At which point, the vehicle was then struck from behind by another van. And the driver of the initial vehicle with the flat tire died from the injuries of the crash.
Can you tell us about the officer? Was it in the right place at the right time, or how did that happen?
So we did have an initial officer that had pulled up on the scene as we were getting information on the crash itself. He actually pulled up on it and then was able to give us some additional information, and we got additional resources out here. But he was off duty and in the area and pulled off and assisted how he could until our other units got here.
So just called it in, but didn't necessarily wasn't involved.
No involvement at all from any state employees or any police officers.
What's the message here? Again, we hate to shame anyone who's just been killed, especially with their family. What's the message with this kind of changing a tire on the side of the road? What is the message?
Yeah, so our message is always that the freeway systems are extremely dangerous. We even say it with something as simple as like a two-car PD crash. If the vehicle's a drivable, we always encourage people to move off, take the next exit, and get off the freeway. In this case, I mean, if you're blocking a lane and the vehicle is drivable, which a flat tire is not going to be an issue that can cause the vehicle to stop driving, we always encourage people to continue driving, get off the freeway, or at minimum get off onto the right-hand shoulder where it's much safer, especially if you're blocking a lane. If your vehicle is completely disabled, obviously there's nothing to do with that. Our recommendation then is at least to stay in the vehicle, keep your seatbelt on, and it'll increase your likelihood of surviving an impact like this.
You just call for help.
Absolutely, call for help, and in this case, you know, in hindsight, nobody can see into the future, but our officer was obviously near that location. We would have loved to just have him pull up on a car that was, you know, obviously not on the freeway. If it was disabled and blocking, and she was still in the vehicle, that would have been more optimal. It's a female, middle-aged female. We're still working on the notification right now, so I can't go too in depth on that. So.
What can you tell us about the closure? How long will they close?
The close now, we have we on the on-ramp 201 bound Bangor Highway. We've just encouraged right now. It will be shut down. I would guess another hour or an hour and a half. We're midway through the investigative process right now. We've got our different tools and equipment out, and we're working through that. So we're about midway through what we need to for our investigative purposes.
A couple more hours, you think, with the closure?
I'd say a couple more hours for sure.
Anything else we need to know here for the safety of this?
No, just reiterate that point. You know, if you get a flat tire, we'd always encourage you to get off the freeway. The freeway systems are dangerous, so we encourage people to get off as often as you can, especially when there's some type of emergency situation.
And did the other drivers stay on scene cooperating?
Yes, the other driver is on scene. We've spoken with them and working through that process, and we'll continue on through our investigation with that. So.
Any damage to any other people, any other cars when this happened?
No other injuries that we know of. There are 3 vehicles total involved. There was another vehicle involved that just caught a little bit of damage from the the other 2 vehicles' movement. Minimal damage on that. It was a Tesla, it was a 3rd vehicle involved. So.
You can see the tire marks that are kind of stretching a couple hundred feet. What do you make of those?
Yes, we've got our MSIT team out, who's our major crash investigator. They're working through that, analyzing the data, and analyzing the different evidence that we have on scene. And like I said, we've got our drone in the air. We're working on that. So we have some good tools to help speed up the process to clear the scene. But we're working through that investigation right now.
Presumably got the flat tires went on the brakes.
It's tough to say without having been in the car and without seeing that. So the different tire marks leave different damages, and we do that to our what we would deem our experts in that field, right? So we work.
Anything else? Anything else?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay,
All right,
thank
Katie.
you. So the white Chevy Malibu was the vehicle that had got the flat tire where the woman was driving.
And the car that hit that person?
It was a Honda Odyssey, a purple Honda Odyssey. And then the Tesla, black Tesla, was the 3rd vehicle involved, but very minimal. So
And no one in that car was in.
nobody in the other vehicles were hurt. So.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.